Hello, I'm Adewiltus, and today I'd like to present my opinion against civil disobedience. Now, very many people are in favor of the idea of civil disobedience, and it could be for various reasons. However, I am extremely opposed to the idea of civil disobedience, as I had recently mentioned on a stream that I was on with Bob Doyle. So, from that perspective, it makes sense for me to explain why I'm against civil disobedience, knowing that some people might have considered this to be a strange or unusual position to take. Now, obviously, I understand that an opposition to civil disobedience is very alien to the liberal mind, for example. However, I will try to explain why, as an ethicist, I oppose civil disobedience. Now, there are a number of different reasons for this, and therefore there are a number of different approaches I can take to it. But I will say that my most fundamental approach is my religion. As a Christian, I am commanded to obey the authorities that God has placed over me, and as such, civil disobedience is something that is not allowable. And of course, I will characterize this type of understanding of authority as a hierarchy. Okay? So if a lower point in the hierarchy commands me to disobey a higher point in the hierarchy, I will have to remain obedient to the higher point in the hierarchy rather than disobeying that element of the hierarchy in order to remain obedient to the lower element of the hierarchy. However, I do not see this as a disobedience. I do not see this as a rebellion. Now, I will say that under my theory of ethics, the imperial ethic, that authority is the element of legitimacy of a moral system, and that therefore the moral system is legitimated through a hierarchy, which is the same as my Christian model. However, I'm using more neutral terms. And under this understanding, civil disobedience is something that is in violation of the authority. It is in violation of a hierarchy, and therefore is something that is unjust due to the fact that justice is produced through the power of the authority. And civil disobedience, therefore, is the exact opposite of a righteous action under that principle. Now, from the idea of political theory, the problem with civil disobedience is that it undermines the state and the legitimacy of the state by creating the destruction of a system of justice that the state produces and enforces. Now, that being said, I would say that someone who has a strong political awareness of civil disobedience and its effects will likely be very harsh on people who engage in civil disobedience. That is someone from the state side of things, from a perspective of governance, to the point that I would say that if, let's say, there were a bank robber and someone who engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, and I had to choose which one of them could receive the death penalty, I would choose the one that engaged in the nonviolent civil disobedience, if only one of them were allowed to receive the death penalty. And the reason for that would be that while robbing the bank is something that obviously is harmful to the victim, that is the bank, it is harmful to the person committing the crime in the sense of a moral guilt. It is harmful to the society due to the economic disruption. It is, however, I would say, not as harmful as engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience, as that is something that harms the state itself and the system of justice which the state uses to enforce its justice upon the entire population. In that sense, while robbing a bank is something that is quantifiable, it is a relatively quantifiable harm, engaging in civil disobedience is a much more unquantifiable harm, and a harm that affects society in a much greater sense. So therefore, when people look at, for example, the event at Tiananmen Square, where the People's Republic of China executed a number of people who were engaging in civil disobedience, I think that that action is entirely justified, because it is through those actions that a state can be destroyed, and it is a state's primary duty under a realist idea of international relations to maintain its own existence. So therefore, I think that allowing for civil disobedience is bad statecraft. And I also think that when civil disobedience is engaged in by one side, it creates a political atmosphere that legitimates the other side also engaging into it as well. And that produces an element of escalation of tensions where both sides are engaging in civil disobedience, leading to the greater destruction of a society than if neither side had engaged in civil disobedience. And you might say, well, what if something is leading to the destruction of the country? What if the authorities of the country are compromised and they are leading to the destruction of the country? And in which case I say, well, let it happen then. And why? Well, once again, my ultimate moral root here is the idea that God is sovereign and God is my avenger. God will punish those who are unjust. And therefore, if the systems of justice in this world are corrupted, then and it is not my right to deal with them. And in some cases, it can be your right. For example, if you are the one in power, or if you are enfranchised in some way to have power in such a situation, then I think it is fair to use your power to fix things insofar as it does not violate higher laws and principles. But I will say that if the corruption has reached to a point that it will lead to the destruction of a society, I still would not engage in the rebellion, as others would be more likely to. So in that sense, I would say that my opposition to civil disobedience is ultimately an element of moral consistency, that if I oppose rebellion in all forms, then I have to also oppose it in that form as well. And I would also say that, once again, the definition of a crime, that is to say, whether a crime is a violent crime, a non-violent crime, or a capital offense, I think that those distinctions are ultimately post-judicial, in the sense that in order to enforce any law to the uttermost, you must be willing to kill to enforce it. Because if you're not willing to kill to enforce it, people will resist, and they will resist, and they will resist until they undo your law through their civil disobedience. Therefore, from an idea of establishing a consistent set of laws, you must be willing to kill to enforce every and any law, even a law that, let's say, has the most minor of penalties under normal circumstances. So in that sense, I would say that the death penalty, in theory, is allowable for any crime and every crime. And the fact that we don't use the death penalty for any crime and every crime is not because it would be unjust to use it for any and every crime, but rather because it would be impractical to use it for any and every crime, in our society anyway. Because there is, for one, the idea of mercy. There's also, I would say, the impracticality of living in a society where people are not good in an absolute sense. That is to say, we live in a society where people are prone to breaking laws. And in order to continue having a society, we can't destroy the society through our laws in order to establish absolute justice. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think it is the duty of governments to establish a most absolute justice. I think the usefulness of a government is to establish a functional system of justice rather than an absolute system of justice, even if, of course, not forgetting the more absolute elements of justice as they appear. And at the same time, there's also the idea of the economic loss of killing all criminals. For example, the bank robber. If you kill the bank robber, then he's not going to pay back what he robbed. It's going to be a lot harder to recuperate that. So in that sense, from an economic perspective, it is practical not to kill people. Now, that being said, I would say that the idea of long-term solitary confinement under this economic idea is less practical and therefore is an element of bad governance. But yes, I do think that the idea of separating violent crimes and non-violent crimes for the purpose of whether or not you would be willing to kill someone is impractical from the position of someone in governance, because if you do that, then people can simply destroy your laws through civil disobedience, and that is something that I do not think should be allowed, and therefore I will not act in a way that implies that it should be allowed. And I think that is the honorable approach. And of course, as a Christian, I'm not afraid that I will lose in the end, because I already know that I'm going to win in the end. And even if I personally lose, even if I personally get destroyed, even if I personally lose everything and am humiliated, that is something that is not really a problem. It is a personal problem, but it is not a problem in the grand sense, because ultimately I'm not worried about having everything go my way. I'm not trying to establish a perfect society in this world. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to a state of affairs that is ideally beneficial, but I perfectly understand that we are not going to be able to create a perfect society, and therefore I want a society that is based on laws, a society that is based on justice, on the idea of reimbursement of victims for crimes by the criminals. I think that from an economic perspective, that is something that is advantageous. And ultimately, that is why I oppose civil disobedience, because it is counter to my religion, because it is counter to good governance, because it is counter to ethics, because it is destructive to a society. So tell me what you thought in the comments section below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have other reasons that you might oppose or support civil disobedience? I'm pretty sure I have heard some of these things. I'm not outside of the sphere of affairs on these issues when it concerns the intellectual discussion. So in that sense, I am familiar with some of these issues, but I just wanted to make this video to explain a bit why I am opposed to civil disobedience, and if there's a problem, if there is an element of disclarity, then please inform me so that I may clarify my position even further. And ideally, we can all learn something about ethics. We can learn something about our differences, because the differences that we have can, in fact, be very important and very relevant. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you next time on the Wiltos Over and Out.